You're listening to the Chief's Cadence, where leadership, innovation, and the future of EMS take center stage. Stay tuned, stay inspired, and lead the way.
Hello, welcome to the Chief's Cadence, the leadership podcast where we explore real-world challenges and lessons shaping the EMS leader. I'm your host, Shane Wheeler. In this episode, we're diving into a very important topic, leadership ethics. Joining me is a true pillar in EMS leadership, law and ethics, Steve Wirth, founding partner of Page, Wolfberg & Wirth. Steve was an early paramedic, EMS administrator, and attorney, and has dedicated his career to supporting EMS professionals and navigating the legal and ethical complexities of our field. Today, we'll explore not just theory, but the lived experience of ethical leadership. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Shane. It's great to be here, and thank you for what you're doing in educating our leadership around the country. Great work.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about your background? I mean, it didn't tell how early you were as a paramedic, but
oh goodness, yeah. You know us, EMS dinosaurs here. We go back a ways. I started at age 15 as a volunteer junior firefighter in a rural fire company in north central Pennsylvania. And got to be an EMT at 16, was in the paramedic class at Williamsport Hospital there in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, way back when, I'll say it, 1979, and was the first class. So there you go, I revealed it. Spent some time on the street as a street medic for a couple of years, became a paramedic instructor, sort of like an FTO in today's world, and then ran the paramedic program for a little while before I got recruited to go up to Erie, Pennsylvania to help set up emergent care, the EMS system up there that was put together by the hospitals and the city of Erie in a joint venture, and was there about 9 years, and then got the crazy notion to go to law school. So and I stayed active, throughout my, law school, law firm life and all that. So I was running actively with Hampton Township Fire there in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, up until about 5 years ago. So, I hung up my hat. It's sitting behind me here because, getting to the point I just couldn't keep up with all that training. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, well, with all that experience, Steve, I'll dive right into it. You've obviously worked with EMS leaders across the country. So when you hear the term ethical leadership in EMS, what does that mean to you?
Well, it really is all about doing the right thing and having the courage to, look at an issue objectively, look at a situation, and make sure that everybody is treated fairly. How we treat the weak, the vulnerable, the destitute, the easily taken advantage of in our society, how we do that from a leadership standpoint and from an on-the-street patient care standpoint, that really says a lot about ourselves, our organization, our leadership, and society as well. So, the old adage is it's the science of right and wrong and that sort of thing. But it really comes down to just making the right choice when there's a lot of the right decision when there's a lot of conflicting choices. And we got a heck of a lot of ethical dilemmas in EMS, don't we?
Oh, we sure. Yeah, I heard you say that science of right and wrong, and I've heard you speak about that in the past, and it's kind of a coined kind of phrase there. So, can you talk a little bit more, dive into that science of right and wrong, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the types of ethical dilemmas that EMS leaders face?
Yeah, I think it really is not just you got to do not just what's legal, but what is morally and ethically correct, and that's the thing. And that's all based on our value system and having a strong human interest focused value system, I think. But we got so many dilemmas in EMS. We got patients who are, system misusers. We've got violent patients, combative patients. We got all sorts of workplace issues. We've got, a DNR case. What do we do in that situation? Mass casualty incidents. Decisions have to be made from an ethical standpoint. And we've got an overworked EMS system, as you well know, in your neck of the woods there, Shane, you're dealing with that. And that creates a lot of dilemmas as to, what are we going to do with scarce resources? What decisions are we going to make? We literally are making life and death decisions every day. And I can't think of another career where there's really more ethical dilemmas than what we have in EMS.
Yeah, it's so true. And I've never, kind of thought about some of the things you just said there, like the the ethical decisions that not only we face that we deal with, but those that of our patients, other public service partners or healthcare partners, how those ethical decisions impact our world, right? So, and that leads me to this kind of the gray zone, right? Because so many times the bad decision or the behavior is that kind of clear kind of world, and what are some strategies that address the gray zone of ethical decision making?
Yeah, and a lot of this is in a gray zone, and that's where the importance of a good foundation there, because when you're not sure, what to do, and there's different choices, you ultimately got to make that right choice when things are tough. Yeah, I think it really comes down to leadership in terms of modeling positive behaviors, modeling behaviors that respect other people. Because I always say when I walk into an ambulance station or fire station and I see people, bickering and backbiting, a sloppy, crew lounge or whatever, guess what? That's how the patients are going to be treated too. So it really starts with the workplace and from the message and the expectations that are communicated from the top, the values, you have to have strong value statements and you got to live it every day, like you say in your article here, and you got to have the courage as a leader to not just, be the role model in terms of modeling positive behavior, which is critical, but you also got to have the courage to call out bad behavior. And that is a big weakness that I see in litigation, the cases we deal with. A lot of them deal with situations where mistakes are made and bad decisions are made. And when you look back at it, a lot of it can be traced back not just to the individual who made that mistake, but the leadership behind it, the policies, the culture of the organization, that sort of thing. So, those are some foundations I think we have to have that are strong.
Yeah, that's very powerful. The role modeling, as you talk about, I think oftentimes we forget as leaders just how much our actions are being watched, right? And can you talk about the role of mentorship with as a ethical tool? The article kind of references this a little bit.
Yes, yeah, you talk about it in your article. Absolutely critical, especially now because we're seeing so many of us, EMS artifacts leaving, or getting near that stage where there's a transition now to younger leaders. And we really got to nurture them and bring them up. And that's where mentorship is really important. There's a lot of great mentorship programs. I know you're involved with some of those things. And I think that's a responsibility that we all have as leaders to pass the torch properly to that new generation so that they get a sense of what's the right thing to do here. What do we stand for? What values? How do we treat other people? That sort of thing. Really, really important.
Yeah, I think the article talks about a case study, and I'll just kind of recap that briefly of a paramedic that inadvertently gives the wrong medication. There's a temporary decline in the patient. The EMT observes this, and then the senior provider says, "Hey, I can't get in trouble anymore. Nothing's happened. Their patient's fine," and they're left with this. Hey, don't say anything. You're new here. You don't want any problems either, right? And what kind of advice would you give that new EMT or paramedic that gets put in one of those kind of situations?
Goodness, that's a great case study in the article. I had a similar one come up to me just the other day and tell me about it. I hear very often that phrase, what happens on the truck stays on the truck. And when I hear that, alarm bells go off. Because that says to me, there's something dishonest afoot here, okay? In other words, if you and I are partners, Shane, you screw up or I screw, hey, I got your back. I'm not going to say anything. It's okay. Patient's not hurt. But that's wrong. That's simply wrong. And that's the dilemma we have here, too, because we're working with EMS agencies that have multiple crews, multiple vehicles, but it really comes down to those two people and the relationship between the two of them. So it really is basically you got to stand up and you got to be, you can't be a bystander when even your partner does something inappropriate or incorrect. Things have to be reported, especially drug errors and things like that. In some of the recent cases we've seen, involving bad behavior on the part of EMS providers. Behind it also were accusations of falsification of the patient care reports and not reporting, not telling the story truthfully. That's a fundamental responsibility we have as healthcare providers. We're dealing with patients. We have to be honest 100% of the time, and the leaders have to really point that out constantly. And I think role playing a lot of these issues too. You could take your case study and actually role play that in management training and with provider training as well. We can do a lot of that with the law enforcement interaction cases that we've seen the big headlines over. There's an ethical dilemma. We let law enforcement do their thing and we sit back, or do we engage? Do we walk up and be an active bystander, so to speak, by jumping in and say, hey, this person is saying they can't breathe. Let us get in there and check them out. So I think a lot of this can be done with role playing too.
No, what a fantastic concept. We spend countless hours perfecting our clinical skills and trainings and ABCs and stop the bleeds, we'll run these high fidelity simulations about every possible potential patient contact you might have, but we do very little education, or as you say, role playing with regards to that. So I think that kind of rolls me into my next kind of thought is, how to build those systems for an ethical culture. So, what do you think, that you talk about the transparency and the bravery, the courage to stand up and say something. So where does it start? Where does that culture, we talk about it being the chief, you talk about it all coming down to the two people. What advice would you give whether it's a new manager or an old manager, right? To kind of, it's never too late to adopt a behavior, right? I've certainly over my, 4 decades have, I joke with myself and some former colleagues that, man, I never would have hired me if what I know, how I was back in the day didn't lack the emotional intelligence and the maturity for leadership roles. So, but, what advice would you give about changing a course or starting a new manager? How would they approach a system to build an ethical culture?
Yeah, I think it has to start from the top. You've got to have a foundation in place from the top of the organization that is committed to it. So it's really commitment on the part of the senior leadership to define and communicate our values to everybody. And once that is done, and yes, you have to regularly communicate your expectations and your values, even though some of them are quite obvious, like treating people with respect and dignity, we have to do that. So I think it has to come from the top down, and then having, good interaction between the new leaders, training programs, maybe monthly, supervisory leadership training, that kind of thing. So many of the supervisory meetings that I've been to over the years were basically show and tell, and you can do that by email or phone call or text or whatever, or face to face. But make them count, give them something that they can learn and take away as a practical pointer for dealing with their shift. And, I think training on just human interaction skills. I mean, we have generations of people that grew up on these devices looking down at them all the time and not looking people in the eye and talking to them. Right. We have really lacked just fundamental communication skills on empathy. Yes, you can train empathy. You mentioned emotional intelligence. I think all of us that are in leadership positions were pretty impetuous and lacked emotional intelligence along the way. Right. We were hard-driving type A personalities. But boy, I've certainly changed over the years. And that's something I think we can teach early on. We learn from our mistakes. Everybody has to learn from them. But there's so many tools available to us now, I think, that we can use to do this kind of training, this ethical decision-making training, emotional intelligence training, because all of this comes down to values and good solid values and good communications.
Yeah, right. And I would like to shift gears about the future of ethical leadership, right? We're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence and a lot of things that are changing so rapidly in the world today. So what are the biggest ethical challenges that you see emerging in EMS over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think the number one challenge is because of the stresses that have been placed on our systems across this country, we have a challenge of just keeping people compassionate. And, you hear the phrase compassion fatigue, burnout, stress. We've got to make sure that we don't have those kinds of things affecting how we take care of patients. And we're seeing an uptick in bad behaviors, dismissive conduct, disrespectful conduct toward patients, not listening to the patient and what they're saying. So I think, to me, that's the biggest challenge, because we've seen the stresses, and because you run a very busy system, you're dealing with people in their worst moments. You're also dealing with other agencies, hospital staff that are overworked and so forth. So it's really, I think, a key to really focus on, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So I think, finally, if you could leave every aspiring and EMS leader listening today, what was the one piece of ethical advice that you'd want to give?
Well, I think empathy management is sort of the thing it comes down to in my mind. It's treating everyone with respect. It doesn't matter what walk of life they come from, and that's treating everybody with respect within the organization, regardless of what job they're doing. And that means you treat patients that way. Everybody's a human being. We don't know everybody's story. That destitute, homeless guy on the street could have been a electrical engineer whose wife died suddenly and lost his son. You just don't know people's stories. So
Right.
We got to appreciate human life for what it is. And I think the other thing is we got to do more listening than talking. I like to say, I say it many times, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I think we don't listen enough, and I think that's important. I always say use the F word with your staff. The same word, it's the same 4-letter format, but this F word ends in R instead of the other letter, and that is fair. Be fair to people. FAIR. One of the problems we deal with in stressful EMS management situations is making sure we're looking at everybody and treating everybody fairly. And the other thing is, I think leaders sometimes have difficulty we take things too personally. That's one of the things I learned over the years. Took a few decades to sort of let things go in one ear and out the other, and not take what that person is saying as a judgment of them. Right. But okay, they're having a bad day or whatever, and not let it affect me. That I think is important. Those are some of the skills I think that are important for any emerging EMS leader into the future. I think we're going to see more stresses, as you're talking about the future, in terms of on our systems. We're seeing an increase in non-acute patients, and that creates a new challenge because we don't teach people how to hold the hand of an elderly person that's going from the nursing home to the hospital.
Right.
We don't, what are we doing 90% of the time, Shane? We're not using our life-saving skills. We're not intubating, resuscitating, ventilating, defibrillating. We're, what I like to say, we're providing psychological comfort.
Right.
And to me, that's an area we need a lot of work on to try to, enhance that type of training within our workforce because of all the changes we're seeing, And bottom line is, we're living in a really polarized society, as you know. It's gotten worse here in the last 5 years too, and that means everybody's hypersensitive. They get defensive, and being nice to people that really goes a long way.
Yeah, really. I really appreciate that too. Right. I always tell people in all my years, I can count on one hand, maybe two fingers, right? The time someone has called me and said, man, paramedic really knows how to start an IV. It was great. It's that compassionate side where, well, they were nice to me, or they held my hand, or they were funny, right? They made me laugh, right? Those things are so important. So Steve, I just want to thank you for sharing your insights and experience, and your words today kind of remind us that ethical leadership isn't something that we study. It's something that we have to practice every day, and deploy with every decision that we make. So thank you, Steve, for joining us today on the Chief's Cadence. For our listeners, if you found the value in this conversation, be sure to check out the full article on ethics and EMS leaderships on GEMS.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the Chief's Cadence for more leadership discussions that matter.
Take care. Thanks for having me, Shane.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye-bye.